is what you do with what you've got. This season, OSU was undeniable. And as a fellow Buckeye, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to the entire team, coaching staff, for this incredible achievement. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, every day nearly 500,000 Americans sit in local jails without a conviction, overwhelmingly for nonviolent, low-level offenses. They're not there because they've been found guilty, but because they can't afford bail or are stuck waiting for their day in court. And while they wait, taxpayers pay the price. That's why I've introduced the Justice Forward agenda, a target, results-driven plan to reduce crime and use taxpayer dollars more wisely. The Community First Pretrial Reform Act helps local jurisdictions cut unnecessary pretrial detention and expand proven alternatives. The DART Act builds off my work as the St. Louis County prosecuting attorney by giving law enforcement better tools like diversion programs and mental health courts to connect people with treatment, housing, and support that actually stops the cycle of incarceration. This isn't leniency, it's strategy. It's about investment, investing in what works and what's
proven effective, and building safer, stronger communities. Mr. Speaker, let's move justice forward. Thank you.
For what purpose does the distinguished gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Do I rise to address the House for 1 minute?
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to pay tribute to a good friend, Fort Bend County Sheriff's Deputy David Fontenot. David was a dedicated law enforcement officer with over 30 years of service, 26 of those years with the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. David and I worked many long days serving and protecting our community. David loved serving his community. He was not only a great sheriff's deputy, but he was also a great friend. He was a man that I could depend on and a true professional. I'm saddened to say that on March 29th, my friend David passed away after a battle with cancer. My prayers are with his family and loved ones, especially his sister Camille and his brothers Chuck, Michael, and Stephen. We love you guys. We love you. I and the entire law enforcement community of Fort Bend County, Texas, will miss him dearly. God bless. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
April 19th will mark 30 years since the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the United States. 168 innocent lives were taken on that quiet morning in Oklahoma City. As many as 750 people were hurt, and thousands more scarred by trauma. The main perpetrator was radicalized by extreme hate toward the federal government, quickly captured, convicted, and put to death for his crimes. Today, we think of the toddlers at the Murrah Building Daycare Center who would be in their 30s today. We pray for their moms and their dads, but we must also pray for our country again. The rise in political tribalism and the hate for others must stop. Our faith in this government must never be diminished in any way that turns to hate and violence. American author Napoleon Hill wrote that every adversity, every failure, and every heartache carries a seed of an equal or greater benefit. May we never forget those words. I yield back.
For what purpose does the distinguished gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek permission to address the House for 1 minute to rise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the robotics industry is quietly reshaping the manufacturing and distribution economies of Indiana and our world. I rise today
to congratulate a team of extraordinary young students at Greenfield Central High School back home in my district for their winning performance at our Indiana State Robotics Competition. Greenfield Central's team surpassed 62 other terrific Hoosier teams to claim top honors. Their coach Jason led the Exothermics. Greenfield Central's team comprised of juniors Simon, Haley, and Braden. These talented young Hoosiers will again showcase their talents at VEX World Competition in Dallas this year. These students exemplify the best of the next generation of innovators, engineers, and scientists. Their work underscores the importance of a STEM education. And much as Hoosiers have celebrated victories on basketball courts, I'm proud to take this opportunity to spotlight these victories of our young Hoosiers in robotics innovation. Their talented minds will reshape our economy. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the distinguished gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In just 2 days, Wall Street lost $6 trillion in value, in the worst sell-off since 2020. Many of my constituents lost tens of thousands of dollars, money saved over decades. Now we're all scrambling with the news of a 90-day pause on tariffs after President Trump swore up and down he would do no such thing. Sadly, we cannot trust a word our president says, let alone plan around his erratic behavior. Mr. Trump's turbulent game of chicken with some of our closest allies is absurd. How does Mr. Trump expect people whose 401ks and kids' college savings account just took a nosedive? How are they to feel secure in their retirement? How does he expect people to save for retirement at all? The short answer is the president doesn't know, and even worse, he does not care. Mr. Speaker, the president lost $11 trillion in value in the first 11 weeks of his second term. I call upon my Republican colleagues to please call out the president's destructive decisions. It is time to say the emperor has no clothes. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the 2025 men's basketball NCAA national champions, the Florida Gators. On Monday night, the Gators defeated the University of Houston in the national championship to become the three-time national champions, winning the first title since the 2006-2007 season, and was led by Coach Todd Golden. The Gators were one of four tournament one seeds, advancing through the round of 64 and 32 before dancing their way through the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and Final Four. After winning the title this week, the Gators ended the season with a 36-4 record, making Gainesville, aka Titletown, incredibly proud. Congratulations, Coach Golden, the entire team, and of course, the Gator Nation. You guys are absolutely incredible. As always, it is so great and sweet to be a Florida Gator. Go Gators, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stiles, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to HRES 294, I call up the bill H.R. 22, the Safeguard American Voters Eligibility Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 22, a bill to amend the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 to require proof of United States citizenship to register an individual to vote in elections for federal office and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 294, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration or their respective designees. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stiles, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Morrell, will each control up to 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stile.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include additional material on the bill.
Objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, known as the SAVE Act, introduced by my colleague Chip Roy of Texas. As chairman of the Committee on House Administration, I've been focused on improving election integrity and increasing confidence in our elections. Let me be clear. Non-citizen voting reduces confidence in our elections. American elections are for American citizens, and we intend to keep it that way. The SAVE Act will strengthen our elections administration and restore Americans' confidence in our elections. The SAVE Act contains critical reforms to update the National Voter Registration Act, which currently requires states to give registration forms to everyone who receives a driver's license, regardless of citizenship. The bill before us would help states prevent non-citizens from voting in federal elections by requiring states to obtain documentary proof of U.S. citizenship in person when registering an individual to vote in federal elections. You're sure to hear from my colleagues on the other side that non-citizen voting doesn't exist or that it rarely happens or that we don't need to do anything about it. Couldn't be further from the truth. However, let's look back 2 months ago. The secretaries of state that I had conversations with shared with me their difficulties that they're experiencing administering the most recent election. 2 of their top concerns were about integrity of voter rolls and non-citizen voting. In our most recent elections, we've just saw 13 individuals referred by the Michigan Secretary of State to the Attorney General for non-citizen voting in the state of Michigan. In the House of Representatives, we often see close elections. We have one member here who won her election by simply 6 votes. It's clear we must pass the SAVE Act and prevent non-citizen voting. There's also been many other examples of non-citizens voting or being on states' voter rolls. Just a few years ago, Illinois removed almost 600 non-citizens from its voter rolls. In Pennsylvania, almost 10,000 non-citizens were removed from their voter rolls. In Georgia, an audit recently determined more than 1,600 non-citizens had attempted to register to vote. Every state also needs access to the tools necessary to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. Right now, states don't have free access to the federal data that tracks citizenship status. Another crucial element of the SAVE Act will provide states with cost-free access to existing federal and state databases so they can perform this important voter list maintenance. In recent years, we've seen an increasing number of jurisdictions across the country allowing non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. Right here in our nation's capital, non-citizens are eligible to vote in those municipal elections. And in Washington, D.C., a non-citizen only has to reside in the district for 30 days in order to register to vote. 388 non-citizens cast ballots here in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. in the most recent election. By passing the SAVE Act, we can ensure that only eligible Americans are registering to vote. Additionally, the SAVE Act is aligned with President Trump's recent executive order, preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections, which will help restore trust in American elections, enhance election administration, and make our elections secure. This legislation is just one step that we can take to ensure President Trump's executive order could not be undone. Americans deserve to have confidence in our elections. We must pass the SAVE Act to prevent non-citizen voting and secure our elections. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The distinguished gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Together with President Trump's recent voting restrictive executive order, the SAVE Act would cripple American elections. It would end voter registration in the United States as we know it. The SAVE Act would end mail-in registration. You heard that right. For all those states and all those people who register by mail, not vote by mail, registration by mail. It would end that. American citizens would have to appear in person at an election office, bring with them various documents and forms to register to vote. Think about it. Just to exercise your fundamental inalienable rights as a citizen of this country, Republicans would force Americans into a paperwork nightmare, burying voter registration under a mountain of bureaucracy and red tape. So what exactly would the SAVE Act do? It would create enormous burdens for every American citizen who seeks to register to vote. Let's dig into the details. As my Republican colleague and friend admitted at the Rules Committee, under the SAVE Act, most Americans would be unable to register to vote using their real ID. Further, under the SAVE Act, almost 70 million American women will be unable to register to vote using their birth certificate simply because they changed their name upon marriage. The bill would disenfranchise survivors of domestic abuse who have changed their names for safety purposes, which is truly shocking. And the SAVE Act will also have a steep financial cost to American citizens because, yes, the SAVE Act does allow Americans to use their passports to register to vote. But half of all Americans do not have a passport. And a passport costs $130 plus additional fees. So the SAVE Act will cost American voters who do not have passports and choose to use them billions of dollars to secure them. Americans are facing rising costs exacerbated by the recent Trump tariffs. Economists are warning about a looming Trump recession. But let's face it, the SAVE Act would force U.S. citizens to spend billions of dollars to register to vote. This includes rural voters, many of whom now register to vote online by mail, who will be forced to drive hours and cross hundreds of miles to present documentary proof. This includes senior citizens, who are particularly likely to lack documentary proof of citizenship, including passports, copies of their birth certificates, or other documents. And what about the men and women in uniform who serve our country all over the world? Can a member of our military use their military ID? Surely, military IDs should be enough to register to vote, not according to the SAVE Act. Service members will need to bring their military ID and a copy of their service record showing their place of birth within the United States. But many service members were born abroad, say to military parents overseas. Many are naturalized citizens. Those service members will be blocked from using their military ID to register to vote. And remember, the SAVE Act's requirement that Americans show their documentation in person at an election office. It will have drastic consequences. The SAVE Act will prevent members of our armed forces from registering to vote while deployed overseas. But the SAVE Act is not actually meant to prevent non-citizens from voting. The SAVE Act is really about silencing Americans. This bill is about disenfranchising Americans, not non-citizens, Americans, U.S. citizens. Americans like James Wilson, an Arizona voter who I met with last week, who was meant to join us in the gallery, who flew all the way to Washington, D.C. last week to watch Congress debate the SAVE Act. He was forced to fly home after the Speaker canceled 3 days of legislative work. Mr. Wilson is an American citizen, born in Japan to a military father during the Vietnam War. Mr. Wilson is also a veteran. He proudly served our nation overseas, including in Korea and Germany. Like millions of Americans, Mr. Wilson does not have a passport because he doesn't need a passport. Like millions of Americans, Mr. Wilson does not have access to his birth certificate. When Arizona introduced a restrictive voter registration law, a law just like the SAVE Act, Mr. Wilson's right to vote was imperiled. Mr. Wilson did not have any of the documents required by the Arizona law, required by the SAVE Act to prove his citizenship. But for a last-minute emergency court order, Mr. Wilson, an American citizen, a veteran, and a patriot, would not have been able to vote this past election. If the SAVE Act becomes law, Americans nationwide will face the same bureaucratic nightmare that Mr. Wilson faced in Arizona. The SAVE Act will force Americans, like Mr. Wilson, to pay billions of dollars to exercise their invaluable right to vote. House Republicans want to increase the burdens and amplify the costs in time, in money, and in effort for American citizens to vote. House Democrats do not. The SAVE Act would cost American citizens something deeply important, something essential to the soul of this nation, the right to freely and fairly participate in our elections. I strongly urge defeat of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, the chair of the Elections Subcommittee and the former Secretary of State of the state of Florida, Ms. Lee.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is an important step forward that will ensure elections are more secure and accurate across the United States. The vast majority of Americans agree that only U.S. citizens should have the right to vote in our elections. Just last month, President Trump took a strong stance, reaffirming his commitment to the integrity of our elections. The president's executive order will help equip elections officials with better data and more resources to administer elections. Today, Congress has the opportunity to build on this momentum and ensure that these protections are part of our laws, that every state can follow these practices, and that voters across the nation can feel confident in the integrity and the security of their elections. Congress must commit to supporting elections officials and voters by making voting accessible and secure. While states are the primary authority on how elections are conducted on Election Day, it is our role here in Congress to ensure that we support them and provide resources to them and to promote uniformity and best practices across the country. One way that we will be able to help provide those resources to states is by passing the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act will help protect our elections and ensure that only American citizens are casting ballots in American elections. The bill will support state and local elections officials by providing them with data and tools to help verify the accuracy and completeness of their voter rolls. As Florida's former Secretary of State and Chief Elections Officials, I got to work with state and local elections workers across the country and saw their commitment to ensuring strong elections. Now, as the chair of the House Administration Subcommittee on Elections, I am proud to work alongside Chairman Stile to advance policies that lead to stronger elections across our country. These tools will help the states ensure their rolls are accurate and help prevent any unintended errors. We know that some states have continued to discover non-citizens on their voter rolls, and there is evidence that some of them have voted in recent elections. We must take steps to ensure this doesn't continue. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address the claim that the SAVE Act will somehow negatively affect married women or others who might have changed their name because their legal documentation or identification may reflect two different names. This legislation clearly contemplates exactly this situation and indeed directly addresses it. Page 14, line 19, directs the states to create a process for addressing this exact issue. Ever since the 19th Amendment passed over 100 years ago.
Gentlewoman's time has
I
expired.
yield an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman has extended an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Married women have been registering to vote and successfully voting. Indeed, I am among them. This bill will accommodate women who change their name, who have not yet updated their documentation to reflect a name change, because the SAVE Act explicitly directs states to establish a process for them to register to vote, irrespective of those discrepancies. Like other areas of the law, citizens will be able to use combinations of existing identification documents in order to register to vote. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I always appreciate the work of my colleagues from the committee who we agree on many things. This is certainly not one of them. I do want to reflect on what the gentlelady from Florida has said, and others have said several times, that the SAVE Act allows states to create a process to provide additional proof of citizenship. Why not write it in the bill? Why are we making the potential for 50 different standards to be set to prove citizenship? What additional forms would be used? A birth certificate together with an ID, also including a marriage certificate, also including a record of a changed name? What must survivors of domestic abuse provide? Court orders protecting them from stalkers, restraining orders, divorce records, divorce papers? How much would that cost? How much paperwork do Republicans want Americans to drown in? Further, how long will these new rules take? The SAVE Act takes effect immediately. What if states take months or years to amend their systems? What if they never do it? So you might have someone interested in voting, but their state hasn't acted. They have no way of proving that the name on their birth certificate, which differs from the name in their ID, is because they got married. You'd be unable to register to vote. Here's what we do know. President Trump's executive order doesn't want any
alternative forms of identification. No alternate state processes, no additional avenues for voters. Why do we expect the EAC to disregard the president's clear desire to limit documentary proof of citizenship to a small, exclusive, difficult-to-obtain list of options? And I would say, in addition to my dear friend, and I mean that sincerely, the gentleman from Wisconsin, like to remind him that an estimated 165,000 women in his district in Wisconsin have a different name on their birth certificate than is on their current photo ID. Under the SAVE Act, these women could not register using their birth certificate alone, and roughly 340,000 residents in Wisconsin's 1st District lack a passport. So the SAVE Act could cost voters in the district $45 million if they chose to comply that way. I'd also like to remind my colleague and friend, Representative Lee, an estimated 170,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than on their photo ID. Likewise, under this bill, these women could not use their birth certificate to register to vote because they have a different name now than at birth. Roughly 368,000 residents of Florida's 15th district lack a passport. It would cost voters in the district at least $47.8 million to secure a passport to register to vote. These are the facts. This is what the bill requires, and so we should not gloss over it because this is a mountain of bureaucratic red tape, and if you can't get it right in the bill, if you don't list marriage license in the federal bill and it's left to the states, who knows how and when we resolve these issues. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield a minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from the state of Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Murley, for yielding. I rise today in strong opposition to the SAVE Act. This bill will make it more difficult to register to vote, and it will prevent millions of American citizens, including married women who change their name, and rural Americans, from exercising their right to vote. It creates an enormous and expensive unfunded mandate on election offices, and for what? Federal law already requires people to attest under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens when they register to vote. Non-citizens attempting to register to vote is exceedingly rare, and if they do, they face severe consequences, including fines up to 5 years in prison and deportation. Mr. Speaker, more than 140 million Americans do not have a passport. Approximately 70 million women do not have a birth certificate that matches their current legal name. And millions of rural voters would have to travel long distances to try to register to vote. We don't have to guess what would happen if this bill were to pass. In 2011, Kansas had a proof of citizenship requirement that actually prevented more than 30,000, can I have extra 15 seconds?
Would you extend the gentlelady 15 more seconds, Mr.
The
Speaker?
gentleman is extended.
Thank
the
you.
gentlewoman from
In
Oregon,
Kansas, more than
15 seconds.
30,000 U.S. citizens, 12% of everyone seeking to register to vote, were barred from voting. Other states have tried, and in all of them, significant number of citizens have been wrongly barred from voting. It's unacceptable, it's voter suppression, and it's wrong. I urge all of my colleagues to vote no on the SAVE Act, and I yield back the balance of my
Gentlewoman's
time.
time has expired. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Illinois, a member of the Committee on House Administration, Ms. Miller, to speak on the bill.
Gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the SAVE Act, which includes robust measures to prevent illegal aliens from participating in our elections. Under Joe Biden, millions of illegal aliens flooded into our country, and many were given the benefits and privileges that should be reserved for American citizens. In Illinois, J.B. Pritzker and the Democrats rolled out the red carpet and actively enticed illegals and those covered by Biden's bogus asylum programs to settle in my state to the tune of over 500,000 people. They received welfare benefits, CDL licenses, state identification, and the Democrats have even voted to allow them to be law enforcement officers. I do not have to tell you how dangerous this situation is for Americans, and especially for Americans' confidence in the sanctity of our elections. As far-left jurisdictions seek to allow illegals to vote in local elections. Let me be clear about this one thing, this point. Every vote cast by an illegal alien is a vote stolen from an American citizen. Congress must defend the integrity of our elections. We must aggressively push back against the left's attempts to change the electorate and dilute the voices of actual Americans in our democratic process. This past week and today, all we hear are the Democrats sharing their concerns that rural Americans, women, and people of color are not capable of getting an ID. This is insulting, condescending, and an untrue argument. You need an ID for most everything else in daily life. Maybe if the Democrats would quit pushing for our schools.
Expired.
I yield an additional 30 seconds.
The
Okay.
gentleman has extended an additional 30 seconds to the
Thank you.
gentlewoman from Illinois.
Maybe the Democrats should quit wasting so much time in our public schools, indoctrinating our children, and instead teach them real-life skills such as reading, civics, and how to get an ID. I urge the passage of this bill, and I yield back the passage of my time.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from New York.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just make note of the point that real ID in the United States does not have citizenship in almost all states. A handful have it, so you couldn't even use your real ID. So we're talking about voter ID and photo ID. It doesn't even allow you under the SAVE Act. So the gentle lady should read the bill. It doesn't allow it, and I think that's part of the problem. I would also just note, Mr. Speaker, in Representative Miller's district, an estimated 150,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than their current photo ID. Under the SAVE Act, these women could not use their birth certificate to register to vote and would not be able to use their ID, their driver's license. Roughly 414,000 residents of Illinois' 15th district lack a passport. So the SAVE Act would cost voters in Ms. Miller's district $53.8 million should they avail themselves of a passport to prove the requirements of the SAVE Act. And with that, I yield 1 minute to my friend, the distinguished gentle lady from North Carolina, Ms. Ross.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to the SAVE Act, which is a transparent attempt to disenfranchise millions of voters. The SAVE Act would change voter registration guidelines to require proof of U.S. citizenship in very narrow ways. However, those documents, as we've heard, a birth certificate or a passport, are not always easy to come by for certain Americans. This backward legislation would immediately disenfranchise the 69 million women who have changed their names after marriage or divorce and do not have a matching birth certificate. There is no cure in this bill. Millions of Americans would be forced to navigate the complicated process to change their birth certificate or be forced to pay more than $130 for a passport. Who would be prevented from voting? Working people who don't have the time to do it and low-income people who cannot afford to do it. House Democrats will not be silent while Donald Trump and Republicans try to disenfranchise millions of people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Has expired. Does the gentleman seek to reserve his time from New York? The gentleman does seek to reserve his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, to speak on the bill.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in every election, somebody wins and somebody loses. Democracy depends on the losing side trusting that the election was a fair and accurate reflection of the will of the majority. And the winning side depends on the same perception for the legitimacy of their office. For centuries, our elections were the gold standard for the world because they were very hard to cheat. 30-day registration, in-person election day voting, and proof of identity were essential components of this process. In recent years, in many states, the woke left has torn down these safeguards. Mail-in ballots where there's no chain of custody, counting ballots weeks after the election day, counting ballots in secret, ballot harvesting, same-day registration, turning election day into election month, and forbidding proof of identity all make cheating easy and destroy the public's confidence in the process. In many jurisdictions, the Democrats have made it clear they intend to allow non-citizens to vote, the ultimate in foreign election interference. Well, I have news for them. American elections are for Americans. The SAVE Act restores this vital principle by requiring proof of citizenship and identity in the federal elections that affect every American. Americans should pay close attention to this vote, for it will reveal those who would subvert your vote to foreign nationals. I yield back.
Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves this time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I remind the gentleman that in the United States of America, to vote in a federal election, you have to be a U.S. citizen. And if you're not, you're subject to penalties for attempting to register to vote, and you're subject to felonies and deportation if you do vote and you're not an American citizen. That's the current law. I also want to remind my friend, Mr. McClintock, that an estimated 135,000 women in his district have a different name on their birth certificate than they have on their current photo ID, and roughly 290,000 residents of California's 5th District lack a passport. The cost to those voters would be $37.7 million to get passports. And with that, I yield 1 minute to my dear friend, the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Williams.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as the Congresswoman for Georgia's 5th District, the cradle of the civil rights movement, the home of Dr. King, Ambassador Andrew Young, and my predecessor, the late Congressman John Lewis. I carry their legacy with me every time I walk onto this floor. The SAVE Act is everything our civil rights leaders fought against. And don't think that it won't impact you or folks that you know. If you got married and changed your name, your ID, it won't match your birth certificate. If you don't have a passport and your ID doesn't match your birth certificate, you can't prove your citizenship. According to the SAVE Act, you won't be able to vote. Right now, under Trump and Musk's disastrous economy, families like so many of those that I represent back home in Georgia are struggling to keep up with the cost of groceries, let alone adding $130 for a passport just to register to vote. In Georgia, over half of the population doesn't have a passport, and our driver's licenses, even the real ID, doesn't prove citizenship. This bill could force Georgians to pay more than $700 million just to register to vote. Y'all, that's a poll tax, plain and simple, and it's blatant voter suppression. Voter suppression by any other name.
Mr. Speaker,
time is expired.
could I yield
The gentleman from New York.
Yes, sir. I'd like to yield an additional 30 seconds to
The gentleman is extended. The gentlewoman from Georgia, 30 seconds.
Voter suppression by any other name is still voter suppression. This bill violates the 14th, 19th, and 24th Amendments, and it's also every tenet of a free and inclusive democracy. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this disgrace of a voter suppression bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields her time. The gentleman from New York reserves this time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, a member of the Committee on House Administration.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or the SAVE Act. Under President Biden, nearly 5 million illegal aliens were released into the United States. Biden's failure at the southern border has diluted the voting power that is reserved for only American citizens. This crisis is not only a national security concern, but one that can seriously alter the outcome of our elections. Just this past election cycle, both the states of Alabama and Virginia removed thousands of registered voters who were not American citizens. Securing our elections is of paramount importance, and we must ensure that it is easy to vote and hard to cheat. The SAVE Act will strengthen our election administration, improve voter confidence, and ensure that American elections are only for American citizens. Specifically, it amends the National Voter Registration Act to require states obtain proof of citizenship when an individual registers to vote. But let me be clear. This legislation does not prohibit married women from voting, and the absurd narrative of this has gotten out of control. When you change your name, Mr. Speaker, just as I have when I got married, you have to provide your birth certificate and a marriage certificate. This is already required when you update your ID, your social security records, and yes, your voter registration too. When your name is legally changed, it updates across government systems. Real ID, passport, other valid forms of ID mentioned in the SAVE Act are sufficient proof of citizenship. And no, your birth certificate doesn't have to match your current ID. Let me just add this. The claim is that it will disenfranchise married women and others who might have changed their name because the documentation might show two different names. But the SAVE Act itself addresses this point, Mr. Speaker, in the text. Page 14, line 9, directs the states to create a process for addressing this exact issue. I find myself asking, why are the Democrats refusing to take steps to safeguard our elections and protect the votes of every single American citizen? I strongly support the SAVE Act, and I look forward to voting for it, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
Gentlewoman yields her time. Gentleman from Wisconsin saves his time. Reserves his time. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hate to disagree with my dear friend from Oklahoma, but the words marriage certificate do not appear anywhere in the SAVE Act. In fact, it could have been written in that way, since you're adding all these lists and requirements of people to do, but it actually does make it harder for almost 70 million American women to vote. 84% of women choose their husband's name when they get married. That's just a statistic. As we've discussed, under the SAVE Act, most Americans will be unable to use the standard issue driver's license when registering to vote because most real IDs don't include citizenship on them. They don't automatically update if you haven't registered at all. So when you go to register, there's nothing to have updated. You have your birth certificate. In the case of Mary Beth Bauer, that's what it says on her certificate. Her voter ID now, her driver's license now says Mary Beth Morelli. She would not be able to register using those two pieces of information. She would have to get an additional part of documentation, which is not identified in the SAVE Act to do it. I think we've talked about it at length. This is clearly intended to make it much more difficult. By the way, according to House Republicans, none of these women should be allowed to register votes. Roughly 25% of the U.S. citizen voting age population. I'd also like to just suggest to my friend from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, an estimated 179,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than their current photo ID. And roughly 394,000 residents of Oklahoma's 5th District lacks a passport. So the SAVE Act would cost them $51.3 million to secure passports. With that, I will yield a minute to the gentleman and dear friend from California, Mr. Mullen.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Free and fair elections are the foundation of any functioning democracy. The SAVE Act is a blatant attempt to undermine our election system, weaken American democracy, and unfairly suppress millions of eligible citizens from voting. If the SAVE Act becomes law, eligible Americans would have to provide either a passport or birth certificate to register to vote and cast their ballot. About half of American citizens, roughly 150 million people, don't own a passport. If an eligible voter doesn't have the means to pay for a passport, they would need a birth certificate that states their current legal name. This act could suppress the votes of millions of women in this country who have changed their name after marriage. So to be clear, if you're a married woman, I guess Republicans don't want you to vote. If you can't afford a passport, Republicans don't want you to vote. If you're a college student whose birth certificate is back home, Republicans don't want you to vote. Congress has a responsibility to ensure all eligible citizens can participate in free and fair elections. The SAVE Act would do the opposite. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from New York reserves his time. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
The gentlewoman from Colorado is extended 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and bless my colleagues' hearts on the other side of the aisle. Using married women as a gotcha for voting. I've never had to bring my birth certificate to prove that I was a registered voter. I have an ID that has a different name than my birth certificate. And also, since we're using women as bait here, maybe in the next round of debates, they can explain to us exactly what a woman is. I rise in support of the SAVE Act. The American people are done messing around with a woke, weak-kneed system that lets our elections get hijacked. I am fighting for you, for me, for every American who knows our vote is sacred, and it's time to lock it down with citizens only. Let's cut the crap. Right now, you can walk up, check a box, claiming you're a citizen, and boom, you're registered for federal elections. No proof, no ID. That's not a system built on trust. It's a system vulnerable to error, fraud, and exploitation. And in Colorado, it was just expedited for the process for illegals to receive a driver's license. And in the state of Colorado, when you obtain a driver's license, you register to vote. The SAVE Act is a common sense measure designed to protect the integrity of our electoral process, and at its core, it requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. This isn't radical, it's not extreme, it's a basic safeguard to ensure that only those who are legally entitled to participate in our elections can do so. Let's be clear, this isn't about denying anyone's right to vote, it's about protecting the rights of every American citizen, not adding votes and subtracting American citizens' votes. I support the SAVE Act. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields her time. Gentleman reserve his time.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time. The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House of Representatives and that any malfeasance of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I inquire as to the time remaining?
The gentleman from New York has 14 minutes. The gentleman from